Welcome to the last episode of an international experts discussion on tracing the origins of COVID-19. The dialogue was brought to you by the independent think tank Global Governance Institution in collaboration with The Point with me, Li Xin. In the final episode, we'll hear from Dr. Jonathan Stoye, Senior Group Leader of Retrovirus-Host Interactions Laboratory in the Francis Crick Institute. And after that, all 7 leading experts will respond to what their fellow panelists say and exchange their views. What consensus did they reach? What major differences emerged among these scientists?
The COVID-19 origin tracing not only is scientific.
We have to be very careful.
The lab leak hypothesis.
Let science prevail.
Good afternoon from London. My name is Jonathan Stoye. I'm a virologist at the Francis Crick Institute. And like Peter before me, I'm speaking on my personal behalf and not on the behalf of the Institute. So what do we really know about the origin of SARS-2? I think everyone agrees that the virus first showed widespread person-to-person transmission in Wuhan and China at the end of 2019. Otherwise, there's considerable uncertainty about its origins. The closest natural variant identified shows more than 3% sequence divergence, corresponding to at least 900 nucleotide differences, and was isolated from a sample taken from a bat more than 1,000 kilometers from Wuhan. So how did the virus change and how did it travel? The most straightforward hypothesis is the virus was formed by recombination between 2 or more so far unidentified viruses, probably in a horseshoe bat. This virus then infected a human or other animal and transited to Wuhan before sustained transmission started. The problem here is that neither original nor intermediate host has yet been defined. I do not find it surprising given the scale of the problem, but others have been quick to advance alternative theories. These theories are hard to disprove, but simply denying their truth merely serves to harden positions and poisons relationships between different organizations and countries. It is indisputable that there are 1 or more labs in Wuhan working with bat coronaviruses or bat parasites, and in at least 1 case performing gain-of-function experiments. It's also true that virus escape from supposedly secure labs has occurred on different occasions in several countries. So it does not seem unreasonable to ask the question whether it had occurred in this case. Simply denying this possibility does not help resolve the question. A thorough lab audit conducted in the early stages of the investigation with a group who was experienced in such matters, given the opportunity to examine all the lab records and to have discussions with all staff, might well have solved this problem. I suspect it would still be a benefit. I consider less reasonable, given the sequence of the SARS-2 virus and other known coronaviruses, to advance speculative theories that virus had been purposely manipulated. At the moment, such ideas simply fan the fires of controversy. It has been suggested by some that fully infectious SARS-2 was present in humans prior to December 2019 in other parts of the world, either by spillover from another animal source or perhaps as a result of escape from research laboratories. Transfer to Wuhan might then have occurred via food chains. However, all these theories seem relatively unlikely given the absence of significant outbreaks of COVID-19 disease elsewhere. Notably, most of the scientific evidence put forward for these ideas is weak. In the future, we need to be more robust in drawing conclusions from flawed data. For example, PCR experiments where only 1 out of 3 reactions gave a positive signal, or serology that might be explained by cross-reactivity to another coronavirus infection. What can we hope for in the future? My vision, or perhaps you could label it my dream, has 2 major features. First is a detailed catalogue of viruses with zoonotic potential, accompanied with enhanced surveillance for virus transfer at the animal-human interface. Second, systems for more rapid reporting and response to new infections should be developed. Arguably, responses to COVID-19 were too slow from all parties involved. We've learned much from the current pandemic with regard to containment measures. More rapid dissemination of early warnings would facilitate responses, for example, through development of rapid PCR diagnostic tests to future emergencies. But where do we stand now? The report of phase 1 of the WHO convened study has been published. A number of reasonable suggestions for further studies have been put forward, including searches for more SARS-related viruses or surveys of additional possible intermediate hosts. However, little real progress has been made in limiting the scope of the inquiry, and it seems that trust between the various parties has all but evaporated. There seem to be serious differences of opinion between WHO and the Chinese government about areas of investigation deserving attention. So we're left at something of an impasse. How can we move forward? We need to clarify and clearly identify the original source or sources of SARS-2 and how it reached Wuhan. This will require the combined efforts of multiple people coupled with openness and a willingness to accept facts. However, it may not be possible until we restore trust between the various players involved. I do appreciate that this is much more easily said than done, but one thing which might facilitate this work is a better specific understanding of the science involved. A second thing would be the development of detailed hypotheses, as well as very specific criteria to assess these, rather than simply relying on mass surveys. For example, reports of serological reactivity must account for the problems of cross-reactivity. And I would like to ask whether it be possible to develop immunological assays that would identify reactivity with the unique features of SARS-2, such as the furid cleavage site. Similarly, any suggestions of virus manipulation must be accompanied with precise hypotheses about the starting nature of the virus manipulated, coupled with details about how and why any changes are accomplished. Eliminating distracting areas of investigation in a way that has not yet been accomplished needs to be an important part of the process, because we need to move with speed. I have one final suggestion. I wonder whether it might be possible to set up a World Coronavirus Center to try to answer some of the questions we're asking. It could be modeled on the World Influenza Center and fall under the umbrella of the WHO, but operate independently. It would also address some of the more general surveillance issues for the future. Thank you.
Many thanks to Professor Stoye. So we're going to go into a second round to give everybody the opportunity to react to what others have said or to supplement whatever they feel is necessary. And let me start with academician Chung-I here. Please go ahead, Professor Wu.
Yeah, thank you. I can see sort of a sense broad agreement. So several panel members spoke about WHO's task, responsibility. So the many teams are, research team are embarked on the search of the origin. And so what is really missing, and I keep pushing this point, there is no conceptual development. Everybody talk about empirical ways of you look this and look at that and use this machine and so on. But people should start thinking about the process of adaptation. For example, so I think it behooves WHO to develop a concept. I keep asking WHO to come up with the model. Nobody say what we are looking for. Everybody say how we want to look for, how many members and what kind of lab notebook they want to look at. What if the virus is actually sitting in front of you? Do you have an idea that that's this virus I'm looking for? No, because we have to think about it, thought about it. So let me just say one more thing, last thing. Please, WHO, please come up with the model. Every team is looking for it, and you are representing international effort. Use some brain, propose some concept, what you are looking for. So that's what I'm asking very specifically.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Academician Wu. Next, let me go to Professor Shi Weifeng. Your 5 minutes.
It's great to hear different voices, and also Luis has said a lot about. He is quite honest. He don't have the facilities and capacities to engineer such a virus near Professor Zheng Lishi. Yeah. So this is what we want to share. So this actually responded to Jonathan. Jonathan, in his presentation, he mentioned the gain of function studies. In fact, so no scientists can do this now because. So my question is, where is the starting point to do this experiment? Where is the genetic bone for this study? So we don't have any information to do this experiment before the pandemic. So no one can do such gain of function studies. This is my view. For the last point, I would like to highlight that it is the scientists should do the origin studies rather than spies. I don't believe spies. As a scientist, I just believe in evidence, real scientific evidence. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shi. You said you only believe in scientists, but not spies. And I would second that opinion. I think the gain of function point, probably Jonathan would like to react later when your turn comes, if you will. And other panelists, of course, if the need to comment on that, you can also do that. Next, Professor Peter Foster, please.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it very short. I want to say briefly one thing on the home study. I found a lot of homework was in there, excuse the pun, but I thought also that they were too narrowly focused on Wuhan as an origin. So even though they looked at the wet marker specifically, as I showed in my presentation, I'm not even convinced that the Wuhan area or Hubei province is the best candidate at the moment. But clearly the data is limiting for these very early stages, and that's not the last word. But I think we shouldn't narrow on a Hubei province origin just yet.
Okay, thank you, Professor Foster. Jonathan, your time to react to some of the points that have been raised so far.
Okay, I must make it clear that I do not agree with gain of function experiment or gain of function suggestions. I think they're extremely, extremely unlikely. The problem is, once the suggestion has been made, you have to have a way of disproving it. And it's very hard to disprove. Now, I agree totally that we are probably not capable of designing such an experiment in order to make a virus that we currently have. And I would have argued that if I had had more time. So I don't think the gain of function experiments are something that I believe in, but some people do. So how do you, and some of those people are influential. We have the idea out there. How do we get rid of it? And it's difficult. And that's why I would like to see people formulating more specific hypotheses which would be testable. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that we have to be very careful about the way we assess some of the sewage data. As far as I know, and I think I'm right, the first report came from Spain, and that was in March or so. And that talked about data based on 1 out of 3 PCR probes. And there was no sequence data. So I cannot consider that reliable. The second report was the Italian one, but that was from samples taken in late December 2019. The third one was a French one, and that's samples taken in March 2020. So I don't think one can conclude from these studies that there was virus floating around in Europe at that particular time. And I think the general point would be is that we have to be very careful to look at the data that is presented before we draw conclusions from it. And I'm slightly worried that people haven't been looking at the data hard enough.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think there are more papers that have been published that actually point to earlier emergence of the progenitor.
I mean, I would like to know where they are.
Yeah,
I mean, I just Googled them, I can't find them.
For instance, the latest that I know is the preprints with the Lancet, which was posted on early August, which says that researchers in Italy estimates that SARS-CoV-2...
At what date? What date?
Yeah.
Were the samples taken?
Yeah, the conclusion is that they estimate SARS-CoV-2 progenitor of known human infections to have emerged in late June and late August 2019 in Lombardy, northern Italy. If anybody's interested, it is open source, people can go and find, but I think the researchers will definitely not make this kind of estimates based only on very few number isolated weak evidence, in your words, and they have a way to say whether the data of the collection of the samples can actually point to that kind of preliminary conclusion. But anyway, just to allude to the fact that there are studies which are pointing to an even earlier date of this virus emerging in Europe, mid-June and late August, late June and late August 2019. So that's a very important aspect in the whole thing. Anyway, it's not for me to to be arguing you here. If anybody still has something burning to say, just to be fair to everybody, how about that? Let me go to Eric Ding, please.
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting debate, and I'm really glad you guys organized it. I think, first of all, that it's not just the wastewater. There's in Turin or near Milan, Italy, there was a child who was diagnosed with COVID from his blood samples. He got sick end of October and was positive in early November. And the CDC blood sample study was published in Clinical Infectious Diseases, and it was actually dated prior to November. I think it was, October, September was the date in which they had found the archived blood samples with the positive results. So those are not false readings whatsoever. And so in terms of gain of function, I also work in policy, and one thing is policy is oftentimes driven by optics. Optics, not the physics optics, but the optics of what people perceive, because a lot of this discussion, we're all scientists, but what people see is that if scientists argue amongst each other, and this is how also climate change is denied, because, the scientists can't agree. We're not going to touch all this kind of stuff. The thing is, when people see scientists arguing about this, it fuels actually that they feel there's a conspiracy, that because the scientists cannot agree. So when we kind of disagree with each other, we have to disagree in a nuanced way. And for the lay public, they need to hear, we agree on this, but it's just these minor details that we disagree on. Because if the scientists attack each other and obviously in a more public forum than this, the lay public will see that this is oh my God, scientists cannot agree on anything. Maybe some of the conspiracy theories are true. I just want to warn that from a policy aspect, those kind of optics really drive also conspiracy theories. So we have to really, in the public forums, disagree carefully about this, about the nuances.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it's very difficult for a lot of people to follow the topic. I mean, I have been doing this subject for so long and reading so much to be able to follow, right? But otherwise, for the ordinary people, it's very, very difficult. And conspiracy has one thing about it, it's easy and it's, thrilling. It's easy to understand and entertaining sometimes as well. Anyway, many thanks to Eric. Next, Professor Enjuane.
Let's see whether I can make 3 points. The first one, I will start with the Chinese government. I think Chinese government has the power to organize by themselves a committee of experts that could investigate the data in China and communicate first the results to the Chinese government. I think they have the right to do that. There are other options, but I think it's important to share the information with the Chinese government, and they can choose the players for this in the world. not only with Chinese, but with other people. And this has to be solved. Then if I reply to Hu Chung from Chicago University, what you are asking for is almost impossible, because viruses, they can make thousands, possibly millions. They can follow millions of mechanisms to change virulence, to go from non-infected crossing species, just with that can take the mutation of a single amino acid on the receptor binding site, but that can be a matter of the polymerase that contains 16 different genes. So there is no model, a single model. There are thousands. Viruses are very powerful. They generate billions and billions and billions of mutants. There are no two RNA viruses that have the same genome. There are always at least one difference between one genome and the other. So they have so many possibilities that it's impossible to present a unique model.
Thank you very much, Professor Enjuane. And Professor Zhiwei, please.
This is something actually science could do the best, not politicians, not senators or presidents. So this is, I think, what we need to do in the future virus origin tracing. The other is that, sometimes as Professor Stoy mentions about the gain of function, it's, I think, technically, it's very hard to disprove this. So this is more like a kind of a trap, okay? So I think this is something actually we should avoid in terms of, this virus origin finding. This is, as a scientist, I think we all should bear in mind that the politics should not step into this this kind of issue. Otherwise, then the international collaborative speed and the spirit of the science will break down. So this is my thank you.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else who wants to make a point, please make a sign and I'll go to you next. Professor Foster, just go ahead.
Yes, well, first of all, I just wanted to offer some common ground between what you said, our host, and Professor Jonathan Stoye on the Italian study. I looked at the Italian immunological study, and I agree that the baseline there doesn't look as if it's conclusive to me. But on the other hand, I do agree that if you just calculate using the mutation rate when the epidemic started, then you do get dates which are autumn. So that is on your side. So I hope that's common ground so we don't argue amongst each other like Eric was warning us against.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think there's no point saying politicians aren't allowed to comment or uneducated people aren't allowed to comment. I think as scientists, we need to provide a plausible, well-founded solution, and then all these counter-arguments will dissipate naturally. So I think we shouldn't focus on criticizing politicians or telling them not to comment. I think we should focus on getting our story well-founded and correct, and then all the other problems are solved.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think, this whole discussion has been a breath of fresh air for me, just to hear people who know what they're talking about talk about this. Any other comments, any other intervention and somebody would like to make about this? If so, please do that now. Yeah. If not, since this is the only comment I've gotten, so I think I should read it to, read it to be fair, by this person called Fernando Munoz. He said, when WHO asked for a second investigation into Wuhan, it negates the first investigation and places a question mark on the competence and honorability of the whole WHO team. However, if WHO was compromised, why should China accept a second investigation? And why even ask for an investigation into Fort Detrick? But if WHO was not compromised, why should we need a second Wuhan investigation? This all points at this question: who would benefit from muddying the waters? If anybody would like to comment on that. Okay, Jonathan, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the WHO investigation was always supposed to have more than one phase. So to say that it's a new questioning phase is probably incorrect.
But it is interesting, and I would like to ask have my questions asked here, because the WHO does seem to have at least gone back to what they have said in the first report. I mean, the first report, the phase 1 report says, the lab leak is extremely unlikely. And the WHO's recent statement says people should build on the recommendations of phase 1 report, but then it says, or options, or another investigation should be focused on the lab. So it seems that the WHO is also contradicting itself here as well. I don't know if everybody is following me. Okay, Professor Wu.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Stoy point that the WHO's investigation could be multi-phased, but the issue is that if the first investigation has the conclusion that it's extremely unlikely, then there is an issue here why you need to come back and to look at the issue which is already concluded as most extremely unlikely. And there are many other possibilities which actually urgently need to be addressed. So this is something actually, as I mentioned, that we are in the height of a pandemic. We need to focus on the most urgent issue, trying to stop the virus from spreading and the people are dying. We shouldn't just address very few politicians' concern. I mean, I fully agree with Professor Foster's point that we need to talk to them, communicate with politicians. What I mean is that I don't mean that we are getting away from the politicians staying in the ivory tower. The issue is that for scientific research, we need to have our own agenda. We need to stick to our own methodology and the concept instead of we are steered by the politicians. So that's something actually I'm actually criticizing about it. So it's the same as the WHO's research into the origin of the virus. Then we need to, from the scientific perspectives, we need to look in the broader possibilities.
I'll ask quickly, and I say that everybody wants the whole matter to be done more scientifically and more scientific thinking. And I've been watching WHO. I find all the statement insufficiently scientific. It's really more administrative, political than scientific. That's why I keep pushing them to do what scientists do rather than politicians do.
The COVID-19 origin tracing not only is scientific
We
based.
have to be very careful.
The lab leak
Let
hypothesis.
science prevail. With that, we've come to the end of this special series on an international experts dialogue on COVID-19 origins tracing, brought to you by the Global Governance Institution and The Point with me, Liu Xin. The productive discussion reached some consensus. For example, we should try to keep the scientific task away from the influence of politics, and the novel coronavirus most likely emerged from nature. Many thanks to all the guest speakers, Professor Chung-I, Professor Shi Weifeng, Dr. Peter Foster, Dr. Eric Fagel-Ding, Professor Luis Enjuane, Professor Zhiwei, and Dr. Jonathan Stoye. And as always, we thank you for having followed us on this special series. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.